G'day legends, as we all know, this week is the week of UFC 306. Something that has been sold to us as the biggest event in UFC history, maybe just outside of UFC 300. It is a once-in-a-lifetime event, brought to you by the Saudi Arabian Riyadh season, known as UFC 306 or UFC Noche. That's right, Riyadh season presents UFC Noche 306. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Now, unless I'm literally the only MMA YouTube channel that you watch, you will have noticed that every single MMA channel out there has made a video talking about how UFC Noche, UFC 306 is an absolute disaster. Why it's just going to be a horrible night and the night is just going to bomb. And you might have also noticed that I have not made that same video. And it's not because I think I'm just too hipster or too cool to make that exact same video that everybody else is making. No, it's actually for two reasons. Number one, I don't believe in rehashing the same thing that's been said 1,000 times before. And number two, I don't really think that the night is going to be that much of a flop. I don't think it's going to suck. I mean, when it comes to the card itself, the fights are good competitive matchups. There's a lot of good fights on that card. There are things that are affecting every single division. The fights matter. We're going to be seeing Raul Rosas Jr. again and see how his career is progressing. I think people forget just how young that kid is and how far he's going to go. And we've got a chance right now to watch a superstar grow in front of us. It's very interesting. You got Diego Lopes finally fighting Brian Ortega. Is Brian Ortega's sitting at the top of that division in the top 5 finally going to be over? If Diego Lopes puts on an insane knockout, I could see him calling out Alexander Volkanovski. Like Shevchenko, is she at that age? Are we finally putting the full stop on her career? And then the main event is going to be very, very competitive. I do believe that this main event is going to decide the outlook of bantamweight for the next couple of years. If Sean O'Malley's takedown game does hold up, he can stay there for a very, very long time. There is a lot to be excited about UFC 306. And then, of course, there's the venue. There's the Sphere itself, right? For a very long time, a lot of us content creators and commenters and you, the fans, and us, the fans, we, the fans, have been talking about how the UFC feels like it's kind of stagnating. It's become this copy and paste, same sort of process every single week. We've talked about how Dana White is not even a fight promoter anymore. In fact, Dana White actually often goes around more often these days and pours cold water on fights. You know, don't even think about Alex Pereira moving up to challenge for the heavyweight title. It's just the same copy and paste. Pick someone out of the top 5, run the same promotion, run the same UFC embedded. It feels very, very stagnant compared to what we used to get back in the day with round tables and behind the scene footage and fight week, vlog week. It just used to be more promoting, and that doesn't happen anymore. And now the UFC has gone on and they've gone, all right, we'll try something new. We're putting on an entirely different event at the Sphere with little movies in between it all. It's got less fights, but it's going to be more storytelling in a venue that's never been done before. Like, this is something new coming from the UFC. And how is that going to feel? And how is that going to play out? That's a good thing that the UFC is trying something different. Here we have the UFC trying something new, trying something to promote the UFC and push it forward. We have competitive matchups all the way up and down the card. And yet all you can see when you go to MMA YouTube is just constant hit pieces about how much this is going to suck. And I get where people are coming from. I really do. And people have asked me on the live stream what the UFC Sphere should have been. And I realize I've answered that pretty concisely. However, the live stream really only consists of about 11 people. So I figured this was a good enough topic video to actually talk about how I would sell the UFC Sphere, or what I would have done if I was in control of the UFC during the Sphere. So if you're one of those 11 people, like if you're Christian Gray from Canada, or Yog thinking about Alexa Grasso's feet right now, or if you're Bilal's only good eye, or Nacho, or Tony, F1, if you're one of the boys that have been on the stream consistently, thank you. But also, you've heard me talk about this a million times. So, you know, give the video a thumbs up. Put a comment down there, and then go and enjoy your bloody day, boys, and I'll see you on the next stream. But for everybody else that watches the channel, for the other, say, 90 or so members that consistently watch the videos, this is what I would have done if I was in charge of the UFC and we were booking the Sphere. And I'm sorry for the long preamble. I know we're probably like 4 or 5 minutes into the video right now, but I do think that rather than talking about how the UFC, sponsored by Saudi Arabia on Mexican Independence Day, is putting on a show in Las Vegas, headlined by a Georgian and American, and the ticket prices are way too expensive, which they obviously are, even though now they've come down to their regular level of expenses, which is still too expensive for a regular MMA fan. But now they're just back down to normal UFC prices, and again, those prices are insane. There's no point going over all that again. And I get why there's so much criticism about UFC 306. But I think there's still going to be something to look forward to. And lastly, I also think that we're all going to enjoy UFC Noche, right? I think once this is over, once this is done, we're going to be talking about how much of a sick card that was, how fun it's going to be. In fact, I see the conversation about UFC Noche going the exact same way that UFC 300 went down just a couple of months ago. The announcement, the hype, the disappointment, the complaining, the actual event itself, and then praise. This is the life cycle of an MMA fan, and I'm certainly one of those. Now, my vision for the UFC Sphere. Look, the Sphere itself, the building itself, to me, it is a masterpiece of capitalism and Western technology. I really is. And it's built in a city that celebrates all the things that makes the West different from other cultures in a desert, all the way from the hustle and bustle of normal life. You know what, like other cultures around the world, they're extremely conservative. Women have to cover up. They don't have the kind of money that the West has. Every culture is, you look at the Japanese, they're very polite people, but the West is just capitalism and loud noises and freedom and being able to do whatever you want. And Las Vegas sort of represents that. And then the Sphere is this building that cost so much to make and is made of a HD screen that is rounded off, like the building is a screen. The Sphere is this thing inside of this city that represents so much of what the West is. It's special. The idea of the Sphere in Las Vegas is special. It really shouldn't exist, right? And the UFC itself, it's a sport that is in one way as old as humanity is itself. Like, there's no make-believe ladder that needs to be strictly followed for some weird 12-month period. There's no ball of air that needs to be chased around a field constantly. There's no nerfing the cars or the athletes so that everything is equal. It's a very primal and very real sport. It's the core reason that I got into this sport more than any other sport, because it's not a game, the UFC. MMA is not a game. It is two men locked in a cage doing almost anything they can to kill each other, save for very few things, right? There's no eye gouging, there's no groin strikes, and essentially you can't just stomp the shit out of someone's skull against the mat. But apart from that, it's very, very real, and it's something that all humans have done forever. And no amount of altruistic thinking is ever going to get rid of the fact that human beings kill each other. And that is so true to the human experience. Yet, funnily enough, it was almost outlawed completely in the 90s. And it almost went bankrupt. It was warned and fought against as human cockfighting. It was told that it would never, ever be a thing. In a society where something like Las Vegas exists, and you imagine what Las Vegas actually represents, in that society, adult men were not allowed to do what adult human beings have always done. It's weird, right? And that was until Dana White and the Fertittas bought this thing that was outlawed and going bankrupt and just pushed and pushed and pushed. And they eventually got it sanctioned. And then eventually they got it allowed on pay-per-view. And then they got it on TV, and then they got it on Fox Sports, and finally they got it on ESPN, almost the epitome of legitimizing this thing as a sport. That was impossible. The impossible was done. And now that sport that was illegal and outlawed has leagues all over the world, in Eternal and Hex in Australia and Cage Warriors and LFA and KSW. Anywhere in the world you want to go, you can go there and watch MMA because of this idea that was birthed in America, Japan, but birthed in America, and then made home in Las Vegas. And now after 31 years, at the peak of Vegas technology, and the peak of where our sport seems to be on top, like it's ending its first successful run on the biggest sporting network at ESPN and UFC 300. These things are now coming together in a building that is literally shaped like the earth itself. At least, you know, if you're delusional, you think that's how the earth is shaped. But nonetheless, right, these two things are now coming together for a once-in-a-lifetime experience to celebrate Mexico. Mexico. This should have been a global celebration of MMA over the last 31 years. This should be our crowning achievement. This should be UFC 300, the album extension. Okay, now I'm not saying that every single fight on the card should be a UFC 300 level fight, right? UFC 300 pretty much was essentially all champions and ex-champions. No. It shouldn't be like that. But there are 10 fights on this card. That's 20 athletes. That should have been 20 of the biggest MMA nations, one athlete from each nation, spread over all of the divisions. That's what it should have been about. 20 athletes from different nations. And every single fight, there should be a little movie played about those nations' fighting story and how it brings the world together through combat and fighting and what it means to be a human being, and then shaking hands afterwards. Globally. The Sphere should have been a love letter to MMA. Global MMA. It should have been a full stop on UFC 300 and a middle finger to all the haters that said that this wasn't going to work, and open arms to the rest of the world, inviting them in and celebrating that 30 years ago, we were outlaws. And through that, we became weirdos in tap-out hoodies that bought these strange DVDs of men beating each other up in a cage. And we were never, ever going to make it. It wasn't allowed to happen. We were bankrupt. And now, in a city where money and entertainment collide, in a building that shouldn't even exist, we should be celebrating our sport as the first live sporting event to ever be able to put on a show like that to the entire world. That's what I would have done if I was at the Sphere. And then, Dana, you would have been able to sell those crazy minimum $3,000 ticket prices to customers from all over the world instead of Mexicans. Like I'm saying that instead of selling it to Mexicans. Like I don't have a problem with Mexico at all. I love Mexico. I love the idea of Mexico. Cheap drinks, great food, extraordinarily friendly people, beautiful women that actually know that they are women. You know, it's an awesome country. It really, really is. But what the fuck has it got to do with the Sphere? Like, what has it got to do with the Sphere? Nothing. Nothing at all. So my vision, if I was the director of the UFC or the director of UFC 300, is I would have built this global event for all of us. That's what I would have done for UFC 306 at the Sphere. Let me know down there in the comments, what would you do if you were in control of this event? I'm very interested to hear. And what do you think is going to be happening at UFC 306? Do you think you're going to enjoy it? Do you think it's going to be a waste of time? Do you think the movies are going to feel like filler? Let me know about it down there in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you're already on board with the channel, please do leave a like. That does help the channel grow so much. And until then, I will see you all in the next video.